A number of spiritual traditions teach that if you want to find God or holiness or truth, you don't need to climb a high mountain somewhere or visit some far-off shrine or even follow a guru from an exotic land. All you have to do is look within yourself and be right where you are, and you'll find everything you need. As the Buddhist teacher Shen Hui put it, friends, each of you has the nature of a Buddha. Bodhisattvas don't hand out the Buddha nature to you, for you and all beings are from the beginning in nirvana. From the beginning, you are endowed with the gift of pure wisdom. Why don't you recognize this fact? And the Hindu Upanishads say, you could have a golden treasure buried beneath your feet and walk over it again and again, but never find it. Just so, all beings live every moment in the city of God, but don't realize it. And the Sikhs say, why do you go to the forest in search of the divine? God abides in you as fragrance dwells in a flower. Seek therefore in your own heart. And of course the Gospels have Jesus saying, the kingdom of God is within you. What all these traditions seem to be saying is, it's all here. It's in you. You need look no further because the answers you need, you already have. Now, isn't that a great idea? I mean, don't you find that kind of an appealing concept? And yet, if it's really true that God, holiness, truth, beauty, goodness, whatever you want to call it, if it's true that it's really right here in us, how come most of us don't find it all that easily? I mean, if it's really all that simple, as the Roman Stoic Marcus Aurelius put it, look within you. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if you will ever dig. Or Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, without stepping outside your door, you can understand the world. Without looking out your window, you can see the ways of heaven. The farther you travel, the less you understand. Or Rumi's Tabrisi, leaving the desert, made a pilgrimage to his own home and found that it was a temple. Okay, if all that's true, why do we keep stepping outside our door looking for truth somewhere else? Why do we need to search at all? And who needs religion anyway? Shouldn't we just give it up and say, I don't need to learn anything new. I know everything I need already. I am the treasure. I am the bubbling fountain of good. That's what all these spiritual traditions are telling me, so why should I bother following any of them? The answer, I think, is that yes, the important things are here in you, but you can't find them unless you get away from here and go outside yourself. You can't see it from where you are. You've got to get some distance. Then you can see what has always been there, but not visible to you before. It's kind of like the guy who was visiting New York City. He wanted to see the Empire State Building, and he got to the front of the building, but he didn't realize he was there, and he asked someone in front of the building, I'd like to see the Empire State Building. Can you show me where it is? And the guy says, you want to see the Empire State Building? And he says, yeah, I came to New York just to do that. I came to just have to see it while I'm here. And the guy said, well, if you really want to see it, here's what you do. You walk that way about 30 blocks, and then you turn around and look back. You know that old expression, you can't get there from here? Well, the point of my sermon this morning is you can't even get here from here. You got to go there to really get here. Let me give you a few examples of what I mean. Consider American culture as a whole. A teacher friend of mine once told me that she couldn't understand why so many Hispanic kids in her class seemed so disrespectful to her. When she would talk to a child, the kid would often just look at the floor and appear not to be paying attention. And she'd say, look at me when I'm talking to you. But then she found out that in some Hispanic cultures, it's considered rude to make direct eye contact with someone in authority. It amounts to staring belligerently, so it's more polite to keep your eyes down to show respect. Learning this didn't just help her understand a child from a different culture. It helped her look at her own culture and see what assumptions she always made without thinking. It's kind of like that, there's a cartoon of a fish. It's taken out of its fish bowl, and when it's put back in, it says to its friend, All this time we've been thrashing around in water. Who knew? Exactly. You don't know where you are until you get away from where you are. You don't see what's right in front of you until you look behind you or to the side or out of the bowl altogether. Take religion. You can grow up in a Western religion like Judaism and Christianity or Islam, and you can learn quite a bit about your particular version of it. But if you step outside your religion for a bit and study some others, that is when you can come back to your tradition and know it in a new way. I saw this happen with some Christians who studied the Vedanta form of Hinduism. This was when I was on my first sabbatical back in 1984, and I went to a Vedanta retreat center in California. Now, Vedanta was intriguing to these Christians, so they studied it, and they discovered that today's Vedanta Hindus really admire Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. They admire it because they think it shows such a beautiful example of overcoming greed and hatred and other obstacles to enlightenment. So when these Christians learned how Hindus saw Jesus, they were able to go back to Jesus themselves and see him in a way that had never been possible before. In effect, that's what happened to Gandhi. His study of Christianity made him a better Hindu. And of course, Martin Luther King's study of this particular Hindu, Gandhi, made him a better Christian. I once heard a Catholic psychiatrist give a talk about meditation and other spiritual practices, and he said he learned about meditation by studying Eastern religions like Buddhism and Hinduism, but he eventually found out that these same spiritual practices existed in his own Catholic heritage, only he just hadn't known them before because they weren't very widespread. So he's now exploring Christian mysticism, but the point is he discovered this Christian path by stepping outside the path. Consider religious mythology. When you study the birth stories of Buddha and Krishna and Abraham, Moses, Muhammad, Lao Tzu, Confucius, you see how many similarities they have, with angels and wise men and virgin births and stars leading the way. Then you come back to the Christian story with a new understanding of the layers of meaning and metaphors that it has. Speaking of learning from other religions, I knew someone who told me he was concerned about Hinduism. He said, why did they worship the cow? It would be so useful if they could eat them, and not just worship them, but eat them. And he talked to a Hindu, and the Hindu from India, and the Hindu said, well, first of all, we milk them, we actually use them, but we don't eat them, and it's probably good because in terms of production of meat, beef is the worst. It takes 22 pounds of plant protein to produce 1 pound of beef, as opposed to chicken or turkey or something. So he said, it's probably good that we don't eat them, but he said, you think that we have sacred cows. And he says, we do, but you have sacred cats and dogs. And he said, and at least we don't sleep with our sacred cows. There's a little joke I've been dying to tell, and I'd like to tell it now. It's about a Hindu and a Jew and, we'll say, a Unitarian Universalist who are on their way to an interfaith conference, and their car breaks down, and it's late at night. This is in the days before cell phones, and they don't know what to do, but they see a little light at the top of the hill, and there's a farmhouse with a light on. So they go up and they explain their situation to the farmer, and the farmer says, well, you can spend the night, and then there's a place in town that can probably take care of your car in the morning. But he says, the only problem is that in our guest room, there's only 2 beds, but one of you can sleep in the barn. And the Hindu says, I'll do that, that's fine. So the Hindu goes out in the barn, and the Unitarian and the Jewish person get in their beds and go to sleep. A little bit later, there's a knock at the door, and they open it up, and the Hindu says, I thought I could sleep in the barn, but there are cows there, And that's a sacred, that's a God for us. I just feel really uncomfortable sleeping next to a God. And so the Jewish person said, well, that's fine, I'll go sleep in the barn. And so the Hindu and the Unitarian both go to bed. But a little later in the night, there's a knock at the door, and they open it up, and the Jewish person says, I thought I could sleep in the barn, but there are pigs there, and that's an unclean animal for us. I just feel really uncomfortable with that. And the Unitarian says, I'll go out and sleep in the barn. So the other two go to bed. A little bit later, there's a knock at the door, and it's the cow and the pig. All right. Getting back. When you think about how much you can learn from people outside your world, isn't this why we learn so much from children? It's not just that they help us see their world, but they help us take another look at our world and the assumptions we make about it. I read about a woman who was taking a trip one summer evening with her 3 young children in the car, and just ahead of them on the road was a convertible with its top down, and in that car was a woman standing up stark naked, waving at them. And just as this mother was reeling from the shock, she heard her 5-year-old say, Mom, that lady isn't wearing a seatbelt. Wow, what a fresh perspective. I also heard about a first grade teacher who was reading the story of Chicken Little to her class, and she came to the part of the story where Chicken Little tried to warn the farmer, and she said, and so Chicken Little went up to the farmer and said, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And the teacher paused and asked the class, and what do you think the farmer said? And one little girl raised her hand and said, I think he said, holy crap, a talking chicken. The teacher was unable to teach for the next 10 minutes. Or consider language. English is my primary language, as it probably is for most of you. And you'd think that the more you immerse yourself in this one language and not get confused by learning others, the better you would understand English. Don't distract me with other subjects. Let me concentrate on this one. But that's actually not how it works. When you study a different language and get out of your own, then you learn to see your own language in a way you never could have before. It wasn't until I studied Latin, for example, with all its different case endings and verb conjugations, that I could really appreciate the simplicity of English, which has a lot less of that. But boy, I really learned how to identify English parts of speech after that. Learning Latin actually helped me understand English. Going there helped me to be here. And I'll never forget one day in first-year Latin when we came upon this verb, movere, which means to move. Just take off the re and you've got the word. However, we were taught that when movere was used with the word campus, or campum, if you're putting it in the accusative, which means camp, it no longer meant to move, it meant to break. And we all thought that was weird. We asked the teacher why it changed its meaning when it was used with the word camp. And he says, I don't know, Latin is just a weird language. But as I thought about it, I realized Latin isn't weird, English is. When we say the soldiers broke camp, what we mean is they gathered everything up and moved it. English has the weird way of saying it. They had, not the Latin. And that's one of the first times it occurred to me that the language I speak has a lot of assumptions in it, which I only saw by stepping outside it. Studying Hebrew had a similar effect. There's some interesting and somewhat strange expressions in Hebrew that don't seem to make much sense at first. Take the word off. This is the A and that's the F. Off, which can mean nose or nostril. Now that's not too hard to follow. Off for this and for this. They're pretty close. But off can also mean anger. What? When you read in the Bible about God's anger, it also means God's nose. And when it says that God is slow to anger, what the Hebrew actually is saying is God is long of nose. Now, when I first learned this, I thought, what can anger and nostrils have in common? And then I realized, anyone want to guess? Yeah, when you're angry, your nostrils flare. Now, my initial reaction was, that's pretty weird. Hebrew is an odd language. But then I realized we have just as weird expressions in English. For example, when someone tries to find out things that aren't their business, we say they are nosy, right? Or, yeah, we say they're sticking their nose where it doesn't belong. And if someone is lying, we might say, your nose is growing. Or if someone is mad, we might say, don't get your nose out of joint. Someone of a different language might find our use of nose just as odd as we find Hebrew. But that's what's fascinating about learning another language. In doing so, you learn about your own language. Things that seem weird in Hebrew, let's say, you discover are no weirder than things in English that you were too close to see before. It gives new understanding to T.S. Eliot's famous lines, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." The late comparative religions scholar Mircea Eliade used to cite a Jewish folk tale to make this point to his students. Eliade was a scholar of mythology and comparative religion, much like Joseph Campbell, and the story he told goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a Polish rabbi named Isaac who lived in Krakow. One night he had a dream, and the dream was that there was a treasure buried underneath a certain bridge in Prague. He didn't think much about it, but the next night he had the same dream, and the night after that, he dreamed it again. Well, after the third dream, he decided there must be something to it, so he packed up his belongings and made the long trip to Prague. And when he got there, he found the bridge in his dreams. But he couldn't look for the treasure because there was a group of soldiers guarding the bridge. Finally, the captain of the soldiers saw him slinking around and said, "What are you doing here?" And Rabbi Isaac didn't want to say anything at first, but the captain threatened him, so he told him about his dream. And when the captain heard the dream, he just laughed and said, "How foolish you are to travel all this way because of a dream. I'll tell you, I had a dream once, but I didn't waste my time following it. I can't believe how superstitious you are." So Rabbi Isaac asked him what his dream had been, and the soldier said, "Oh, long ago I had a dream of a treasure buried back in Krakow underneath the stove of a Jew named Isaac. But you don't see me running out to Krakow to go find it, do you?" And at that, Rabbi Isaac thanked the soldier for his words of wisdom and left immediately and walked the long journey home. When he got there, he dug up the earth beneath his stove, and sure enough, there was a chest full of gold. Mircea Eliade used to say, the point of this story is that your treasure is at home, right where you started from, but you have to go on a journey to somewhere else in order to find that it's been under your stove all this time. What are the implications of this? Well, for one thing, the most important things you'll ever learn are likely things you already knew, but just not in the way you could know until you stepped outside your knowledge base. For another, the answer to most of your problems you already have inside, but you're not likely to find those answers until you see other people with those same problems and you think, why don't they just? And then you think, why don't I just? Another implication is if the answer is in here, maybe the obstacle is in here too. It's not necessarily out there, although it's convenient to think so. As the Islamic mystic Hazrat Ali once put it, your medicine is in you and you do not observe it. Your ailment is from yourself and you do not recognize it. Or as Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, if you will not know yourself, then you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty. Another implication in all of this is that your past, present, and future will all get commingled in strange ways. For example, you will find yourself having an aha experience, but when you think back, you'll realize you've had that aha before, only maybe it wasn't as deep an aha. And you probably have that same aha in the future. And you might think, gosh, I seem to be going around in circles, learning the same things over and over. But you're not really, because each time you learn the same thing, it's at a different level, a deeper level. So you're not going around in circles. You're not going in a straight line. You're going in a spiral, encountering the same questions, touching the same issues, but at a deeper level each time, or at a higher level each time, depending on your metaphor. And that's why there are such things as Unitarian Universalist churches. You see, you could just come here and hear us tell you that you have divinity within you and think, well, if I already have it within me, why do I need to go to church? The answer lies somewhere in the word educate. Those of you who are or were teachers may already know this. The word educate comes from the Latin educare, the A meaning out, ducare meaning to lead out. To educate means to lead out, to draw out. This is different from pouring something in. To draw out assumes that there's something already in there. And that's what we do in this church. You don't come here to get divinity poured into you. You come here to have the divinity you've already got drawn out. It's already there. But you might not actually see it if you have no one to draw it out and reflect it for you. That's what we do here. We don't give you something you don't already have. We just help you see it. And we have faith that once you see it, you will live it. That is what good friends do for one another, and that's what happens in a good marriage. It's not that we need someone else to make us complete, like the song, "You Were Half, Now You're Whole." No, it's that a friend or partner or a church can help you find that part of you that you wouldn't have seen on your own. And the last implication here is that if you've been searching for truth or goodness or beauty somewhere else, that's fine, as long as you don't get trapped in exotica. You know, exotica means those things that seem unusual, those things that are far away or foreign. The exotic always appears more interesting than what's at hand. Oh yes, the truth must be out there. And that's why a speaker from afar always seems more knowledgeable than one from your own town. We even have an expression for this phenomenon, the expert from afar. Or as Jesus put it, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country. You know, I sometimes meet people, some of them Unitarians, who seem to be mainly interested in exotica, that is, things from far away, things that are foreign. Let's say they were raised a Christian, and they see all the problems in Christianity, so they think the truth must be somewhere else, maybe in Buddhism. So they jump into that. But meanwhile, there are people who were raised as Buddhists who are saying, boy, this is an incredibly boring religion. Or Buddhism is just too weird. Maybe Christianity will have the answers. My point is, it's fine to go searching and look far away and climb the highest mountain and visit far countries and explore exotic cultures and religions. But remember, the truth is here too. As the Confucian teacher Chung Dao-Ke put it, the student said, "I came here to find the truth, Master." The master replied, "Why wander around and neglect your precious treasure at home?" The student said, "Precious treasure? What do you call my precious treasure?" The master replied, "That which asks the question is the treasure." Your treasure is right here. And you may have to go about 30 blocks away and turn around to see it. But once you do see it, don't stay out there. Come back and forth and back and forth in the spiraling journey of your life.